Hi everybody, it's Annabelle and welcome back to my channel. Thanks so much for joining me. In today's video, I wanted to answer some questions that I get asked frequently. I actually wanted to address in a specific video so that I can maybe link people to this in future. So if you're coming here after me having linked you to this video, thank you so much for your question. Basically, I get a lot of questions that are kind of along the same lines quite regularly. So I really just wanted to make a video where I can address these because I obviously do my best to answer the comments in like a orderly, timely and complete way, but that doesn't always mean that you get the full picture. So I really wanted to try and give you more detail basically, rather than writing a whole essay in the comments section. So I really hope that this video is helpful and useful in addressing some of the questions that you guys ask me frequently, and I know that the majority of people maybe don't want to comment on videos, so hopefully if I'm getting asked these questions a lot, it also means that people are interested in the answers who maybe haven't commented, so I hope that this video is useful today. So the first question that I'm going to address is a section of questions looking at watering, fertilizing and that sort of thing. So the first question is, what fertilizer do I use? So basically I use a complete balanced NPK plus calcium plus magnesium, which also includes micronutrients. This is called Rain Mix. There are lots of different brands out there that will provide a similar kind of effect. I think Rain Mix is mainly available in the UK and EU. However, if you're in America, you have the option of the MSU fertilizer, which I think can be supplied by Repotting. I will link them. I'm not affiliated with them at all though, but MSU fertilizer is kind of the best one available, and Rain Mix was developed off the back of MSU, so it's like the European equivalent. However, the formula has moved quite significantly away from the original Michigan State University study formula. So Rain Mix is different, but in essence, it's a complete balanced fertilizer which has really decent levels of NPK plus calcium and magnesium included. If you can only get an NPK, what you'll maybe need to do is supplement a calcium and magnesium separately. So fertilizer brand doesn't matter so much, but the elements involved do. Lighting will affect how you fertilize, so high light will be much less forgiving to under-fertilizing. Light temperatures and watering practices drive growth, and fertilizer only supports this growth by supplying the building blocks needed. For example, for cell walls and chlorophyll pigments, calcium and magnesium are really kind of critical components for new growth, nitrogen, that sort of thing. So at a minimum, feed a balanced NPK and alternate this with calcium and magnesium. Now, a lot of people get very hung up on ppm, or parts per million readings, which is a really nice, easy way that we can measure using a TDS meter the rough components of our fertilizing routine in quantities. So it gives us a way to quantify, but this is more of an internal control because we couldn't generalize this between fertilizers really. However, if you're looking at individual elements, you can kind of get a rough idea. Now this is kind of skewed by a few different factors, which I'm not going to go into in this video. However, it's worth bearing in mind that it's a guide only, not something that you can be precise and exact about between different meters and different areas and different waters. Parts per million and quantity of each element really depends on environment. High light, warm temperature environments will need high fertilizer levels compared to low light, cooler environments where there'll be less active growth. It all depends on the level of growth going on with your plant. When growing lots, fertilize more, and when growing less, fertilize less. As a general kind of standard, I use Rain Mix at around 200 to 300 parts per million. I've got a detailed fertilizer video which I will link you to up in the corner and down below in the description. I used to supplement this with silicon, however Rain Mix already has silicon in, so I really don't feel that this was necessary, and I started noticing with my Phragmipediums I was getting maybe some calcium lockout. I discussed this with a couple of people, including Dustin from Here But Not, who is fantastic to talk to about fertilizer and that sort of thing, and I love chatting to him about that sort of thing. Because it's nice to meet somebody as nerdy as me when it comes to fertilizer. We kind of came to the conclusion on a few studies that silicon can affect calcium, like mobilization and uptake, so I dialed down the extra silicon I was supplying as it was probably overkill. So Rain Mix already had silicon in, and then I was feeding extra. And for some orchids this was great, for others this maybe was causing some issues, particularly the ones that aren't great at taking up calcium anyway because they're from calcium abundant environments like my Oncidiums. So there's something to just be aware. If you feed in excess of one type of any nutrient, any element, it can actually skew off the way that another element is taken up. So it's kind of easier to buy a specific fertilizer that's had the correct optimum levels formulated in. If you're feeding things separately, it's just worth bearing in mind and looking into that more. But I'm not going to spend too long in this video going into that. So my next question is, how do I water? So I water using a 20-litre electric pump sprayer. In summer months, I use reverse osmosis water. I fitted a system following my house move at the end of last summer. In winter, I'm very lucky with this place that I've got the facilities to be able to collect rainwater, which I never had before. I always used to have to use zero water. So in autumn to spring, I can actually collect rainwater and use purely rainwater. So I collect the rainwater and then bring that in to warm up. For this video, I'm just going to show you using just rainwater, but if I was going to be using fertilizers and nutrients in with this, I would add in my rain mix, my seaweed, my humic and fulvic acids, and then I would add in the rainwater from the water butt and fill this to around the 40-litre capacity. I'd then take 20 litres of this into my electric pump sprayer, which actually has a mesh filter to stop any debris clogging up the pump sprayer. So I pour in the water, which has already been mixed with the fertiliser mix if I'm using fertiliser, or in this case just pure rainwater. I fill this up to the 20-litre capacity of the pump sprayer. I then bring that inside and leave it for a few hours at room temperature to warm up. This is very important for any orchid watering when you're bringing in rainwater from outside. I then check the pH. Since using rainwater, I've noticed I don't really need to pH very much because my pH rests at around 6.2 after I've added everything, which is fine for me. So I'm not really bothering with that so much anymore, but I do check it each time just to make sure. I then use my electric pump sprayer. This was a fairly pricey investment, but has cut my watering time down to around 1 day every 2 weeks to 4 weeks in winter. It was pricey, and I used to use a manual pump sprayer, and that was great, but it was a lot of work, and I have really bad joints, honestly, for my age. I do take supplements, don't need to go into that here in this video, but I get really bad hand cramps and like repetitive strain almost from the pump sprayer action because I have so many orchids. So holding down the manual pump sprayer with my hand, I was getting issues. So I switched to this, and it's just saved so much time, and it was 100% worth the investment for me. I'm not saying it's necessary for everybody, of course not, but this is just what I do, and it saves me so much time and hassle. So in winter, when humidity is ranging from 70 to 90% in the new grow room, I am actually allowing plants to dry slightly between waterings, which I would never usually do. So the reservoirs empty very slightly, and I can go around 4 weeks at the moment without watering. In summer, this is every 1 to 2 weeks. The next thing we're going on to talk about is flushing, and I'm actually going to show you an example in this video, which is why I got just the pure rainwater from outside without any nutrients added. Also so I could water my carnivorous plants because they are due a watering day because they can never dry out. So what I do to flush is I take the plant down. If it's in a self-watering pot, I take it out of its cover pot, take the orchid down and flush through using pure rainwater or reverse osmosis water, flushing over using my pump sprayer to flush the salt deposits down from the top. Usually salt deposits only happen for me with smaller plants or during winter when I'm maybe fertilising a little bit more than is necessary for the level of growth that I'm getting. This will be linked to light, so higher light during more active growth periods. I don't tend to need to flush very often at all. In winter I do need to, so I flush every sort of 3 out of 4 waterings, and in summer I don't flush at all. So I flush all the salts from the top of the pot, and then I will top back up with my nutrients if it's in a semi-hydro pot, or for the self-watering I just pop it straight back into the pot where it's got its nutrients in already. When I'm repotting, I either reuse old medium or fresh medium. If you're interested in learning how I clean and reuse my LECA, I'll link that video up in the corner and down below. If I'm using LECA straight out the bag, I give it a good 3 to 4 rinses and overnight soaks before I use it to remove any salts that are remaining from the manufacturing processes. This means that I very rarely get any salt buildup. It is just in winter really. And this is why in winter, every 4th watering, I do a pure rainwater watering. And in summer, I don't need to do that. Next, a question I get asked a lot is the minimum temperatures for semi-hydro. And I'm actually going to generalize this to just minimum temperatures for orchids in general. So it really depends on the type of orchid. Some orchids will tolerate cooler, wetter roots better than other orchids. Humidity is also a factor as it affects the moisture levels in the pot. For warmer growers like Phalaenopsis, a minimum of 18 degrees Celsius, which I'll pop up on screen in Fahrenheit, is really a necessity as a night minimum. Oncidiums I found are a little bit more tolerant to cooler, wetter roots, but only a little cooler in my experience, and I always try to aim for a minimum of 18 degrees Celsius at night for the warmer growers. This needs to be followed ideally by warmer days. So ideally I'd say a minimum of 18 degrees Celsius night, 22 degrees Celsius day winter minimums for semi-hydro, and this is only because of the cooler, wetter root effect that can trigger fungal and rot issues. But if you are growing cooler, I would consider that semi-hydro may not be ideal for you during those winter months, and you may instead want to follow wet-dry cycles. You can do this with inorganic medium, provided that the humidity is such that you don't get a desiccating environment around the top layer, but it's really a trial and error situation. Another question that I get asked frequently is about mould in semi-hydro, or just mould in orchid pots. So this is something I want to go into a little more detail on. So mould can occur in several situations. It can occur following initial transplant or repots. Initial transplant mould can indicate a variety of things, including old organic media left attached to the roots, root death following the transplantation, or an imbalance triggered in the microbiome surrounding the roots. These can apply to all subsequent repots too. So I want to go into a little bit more detail about what I mean by a microbiome imbalance. So there's a natural amount of good bacteria and fungal strains that surround the root zone, which is also called the rhizosphere. This good bacteria and fungi balance helps to compete with bad bacteria and fungi, which are pathogenic. This creates an equilibrium in the pot that actually stops the pathogenic strains or annoying strains, even if they're not pathogenic. Some mould strains can be a little bit unsightly. It stops them out competing the good strains and taking over. Whenever we repot, we can actually disturb this balance, which can also be exacerbated by use of hydrogen peroxide. Now, I know hydrogen peroxide is fantastic for killing all fungal and bacterial strains and spores, and also killing any snails and snail eggs. But I tend to now use it purely for snails and snail eggs. So really just for Oncidium repots only. So whenever we repot, we can disturb this balance, and sometimes a visible unsightly or pathogenic or bad fungal growth can take over. Now, for the most part, what I find is I get a fuzzy mould that can occur following repots of orchids that are taking a little bit longer to transition, and I think that this is linked to that good bacteria and fungi having been imbalanced. So this fuzzy mould can just be unsightly, and I've not experienced a pathogenic kind of strain that's actually killed roots or anything. So I can only base this on my experience. But what I do when this happens is I increase flushing and I leave well alone, and it will often go away within a month or so. The difficulty comes with the fact that we can't actually tell what's harmful and what's benign, so we may worry about it, and how you tackle it's really up to you. I leave well alone and increase flushing, and within a month it usually sorts itself out, whatever the cause. But I'm not saying you should do this, it's just how I choose to deal with it, and it's never caused me any issues, and I really wouldn't want to recommend you doing something like this and then something bad happening. I would feel terrible. So I just this is how I deal with it, and as you get more experience and as you go along, you may want to deal with things a bit differently. It's probably best to play it safe for when you first start off, and maybe unpot and check the root system, see what's going on. If all the roots are good and healthy, it could just be an imbalance that will correct itself over time, but it's probably worth playing safe until you've got a bit more experience in this. Repotting and disturbance does add more stress to the orchid during its transition, so it's not ideal, but it may help you out while you're starting and sort of getting a feel for what's going on following the repot. Another question I get asked regularly is about reducing adaptation stress to semi-hydro, and this goes hand in hand really with when you repot. So the timing of repot can be critical if you experience issues with transitioning new orchids to semi-hydro. New roots are better able to adapt to a new medium than older roots. This goes for all repots, not just transitions to semi-hydro, so you should always time a repot or a transition with new active growth. When you repot can depend on the type of orchid that you're repotting. So for a sympodial orchid, you want to repot when the new growths are just about to start new roots, but this can differ for different species. If the new roots are too long when the repot occurs, you risk scuffing the new developing root tips during the repot, which could then potentially dry and stop growing. If the new growth is too far away from maturity, though, if it's the type that only produces roots when nearly mature, then repotting too soon could find the old root system failing before the new root system is ready to take over. It's a difficult question to answer because of the variability of when sympodial orchids produce new roots. Monopodial orchids are much easier to judge. When they start making 1 or 2 new roots, more are usually along the way also as vegetative growth has been triggered. So it's a difficult question to answer, and often it's worth actually looking up the species or hybrid if you're looking at a sympodial orchid and seeing at what stage that new growth actually produces new roots. You could ask people who have this orchid, you could look at repots for this orchid, and you could put notes down into your records keeping system, if you have one, about when that orchid produces new roots, and this will give you the most optimal repot. However, sometimes for me it's weighing up the medium that the orchid has come in, and I think that this is something, when you've got more experience, you can judge a little bit better. So if I get a new orchid in, for example, a new Oncidium is probably the worst case scenario. So I get a new Oncidium, and in my region I get a new Oncidium, it's likely to be infested with the little tiny pot snails that eat all the new roots and the old roots. So my preference is just to repot straight away. This can damage the old root system, it may well die off. If the orchid is flowering, it may be diverting energy to its flowers rather than actually active growth, so it may be at the worst possible time to repot, but if I wait, the snails in the pot could eat new roots and then I've got an even worse issue. So I tend to just do it, repot, I cut the flower spikes if necessary, if it looks like the orchid is struggling, and then it can push out new growth and new roots in its own time and not have snails there to munch off the new root tips. It's a personal preference, and it's something that I think everyone has their own way of dealing with, so it's just kind of up to you, but that's my feeling on repots. Something else that I get asked quite often is why an orchid may not be flowering, and this can be due to a variety of reasons, but the most common is the lighting, either the light period length, called the photoperiod or day length, or the actual spectrum involved in the lighting that's being provided. Plants supposedly need more of a red wavelength spectrum to push flowering and more of the blue wavelength spectrum to push growth. So it's worth looking at the spectrum of light that you're providing if you feel that you're providing sufficient lighting. Another thing to look at is adjusting the day length if you're growing purely under artificial lights. Sometimes it can be that you're not providing that seasonal variation in day length. Another thing to look at would be the actual day-night differentials. If the orchid is a seasonal bloomer, look at when it would normally bloom in nature or when other growers are reporting it blooms. So you can often, what I'll do is, if you look at videos on YouTube, look at when they're published as to when the flowering period was, because it may just be that it's a seasonal bloomer and you haven't given it the seasonal triggers. Or it could be that it's not getting the seasonal triggers because you're growing in a very controlled environment, which is something that I found when growing under artificial lights. Some of the seasonal bloomers wouldn't flower, that they are flowering now that they're getting a slight night temperature drops, that sort of thing, day length changes. So it's worth looking at all of those factors as well as the general health and maturity of the orchid. Another question that I regularly get asked is about humidity levels. So high humidity can reduce the dry layer in inorganic systems and reduce the evaporation of water from the pot from all systems. But it also creates an ideal environment for molds, bacterial infections and pathogens. High humidity also reduces the amount of water that the plant is losing through its stomata. So in most cases, low humidity can be balanced by improved and increased watering practices. In high humidity situations, increasing airflow can help some to reduce the mould issues and pathogen issues that you can get with high humidity environments. I've found humidity levels over 70% to be less than ideal for the majority of orchids in self-watering or semi-hydroponic systems. If that humidity level is continuous, that is. In general, it's harder to work with high humidity in my experience for most genus, including Phalaenopsis, Vandas, Oncidium and Cattleya, than it is to work with low humidity. And this of course is not encompassing the extremes of low humidity, but just the extremes that I've had to deal with, which is kind of a minimum of 15 to 20%. In relative humidity levels over 80% with not enough airflow, rot can be an issue. In low humidity levels, say 30% or under, there's much less chance of possible rot, but watering more frequently or misting down the top layer of LECA may be required. Low humidity is very unforgiving of erratic watering or drying out of the pot, so that's another caveat. With low humidity, you need to be kind of really on it with watering. With high humidity, you almost need to be letting things dry a bit more to balance that. So that's kind of an overview of the things that I get asked the most frequently about on this channel, and I hope that that is useful and interesting for you guys, and I hope that it's answered some of your questions. Obviously, if you have more questions, pop them in the comments down below. I'll do my best to answer, and if I can't answer fully, then I will try to put them on a list to make a video about, because I don't know what people want to know until you guys ask. So I hope that this has been useful, and you've also got a sneak peek of my orchid wall here, which will be coming soon in a later video. Thank you so much for watching today. I've had a busy day rearranging the grow rooms, so I'm looking forward to showing you guys around a little bit, and I hope I have a little bit in this video. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a like or subscribe to my channel for more regular orchid updates, and I'll see you guys all later. Bye!